And we are in full swing now with March funness. For the full experience, check out the daily Fun Astrology podcast, but also check out Subconscious Mind Mastery and our private Facebook group all week for tips, techniques, and exercises on how we can master the subconscious side of this once ever time in Pisces. And we'll be enjoying the fun. The link to the Facebook group is at the top of funastrology.com. This episode is also on camera on the all-new Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast YouTube channel. The link is in the show notes. Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. Thomas Miller and Robert Glasscock, and we have a question that is going to be something that you're going to want to lean in and listen to the answer.
Hi, Thomas and Robert. I listen to your weekly podcasts, and I've gleaned so much to add to my base knowledge of astrology since I started tuning in about a year ago. My question is, how do you see marriage in a birth chart? Many resources I found use progressions and chiron transits to determine favorable times, but I'm looking for the promise in the birth chart, either early in life, midlife, or late life. Also, I found that this is one of the top questions people have when consulting an astrologer. If you could base a podcast on this question, I would be very grateful, and I'm sure your listeners would too. Thank you very much.
I'll bet we can do that. And I just thinking as that was playing through, one of the things you identified in my chart is that my Saturn is at 2 degrees in the 7th house of marriage and partnerships. And I've been married twice. So I know that's going to be in there somewhere with this. But boy, it sounds to me like a loaded up question.
It is a loaded question, and it's a loaded topic. One of the most important ones, I think, in astrology. As she says, it's probably the number one question every client asks an astrologer. Thomas, you know my mantra from having taught at Kepler College for all those years. Make something out of everything you see.
Absolutely.
And I mean it. So marriage, and so many newer astrologers are looking for quick, easy, simple techniques. In truth, there aren't any, especially for something as complicated as marriage. It's ruled by the 7th house, mainly because the marriage partner is equal to you. And they're the only people that are. The same applies for business partnerships, like Thomas and mine. Neither one of us is more equal in this business partnership than the other one. And that establishes a 1st, 7th relationship. Children are not equal to the parents. Parents raise the children, not the other way around. Employees are not equal to us. We hire them. Teachers are not equal to us. They're in a different house. So establish this idea of equality in terms of the 7th house, marriage. Here's where you begin. You look to the cusp of the 7th house and the sign that's on that cusp. That's a starting place. Now, if you think of the planets as being inside of us, internal, our DNA, if you will, then those establish a snapshot of the archetypes at birth. The transiting planets are outside of us, impinging on our interior natal planets. So the transits are external forces coming at us and triggering what's going on inside of us from birth. And there's an old mantra, if it's not in the birth chart, it's not going to happen. And not everyone is born with an equal shot at a successful marriage. Most marriages do not last a lifetime. They do in some cultures where divorce is not permitted, and so on. So they're external factors, but you begin by looking at the sign on the 7th cusp. The house cusps are external conditioning regarding those house matters. So the sign on the 7th cusp will show you a great deal about how you've been conditioned to relate to the concept of marriage. And we now have to get into things like fertile and infertile signs, and barren and semi-barren, and fertile and semi-fertile, and so on. The water signs are all fertile, for example. And these are all topics that you're going to have to research on your own. The sign on the seventh cusp then will indicate the conditioning that you have in your belief systems about marriage. For example, you can take a chart with, let's say, Cancer, the sign of Cancer on the seventh house. The person is looking for emotional and financial and material security through marriage. And in fact, they may have been conditioned to believe that marriage is the true answer to finding your roots, your security. That's great, because it can be. Then you take the planet that rules the sign on the seventh cusp. Is it in a sign that is favorable for marriage? So you have to weigh that factor as well. Some signs are absolutely independent and prone even to divorce or separation or to multiple marriages. The ruler of the seventh in a multiple sign like Gemini or Sagittarius or Pisces can indicate more than one marriage. So you're beginning to total up these indications to weigh them all together. So the sign on the seventh cusp, is it a fertile sign, a barren sign, a sign of togetherness, or a sign of separation? The ruler of the planetary ruler of the seventh house, what kind of a sign is it in? And what sorts of aspects does that planet make in the birth chart? Then you want to look for any planets in the seventh house. Now, obviously, a planet like Jupiter or Venus in the seventh house predisposes to a favorable marriage in the birth chart. If it's not in the birth chart, it's not going to happen. So the benefics in the seventh house alone will tend to indicate, quote unquote, favorable marriages. But again, the aspects to those benefic planets in the seventh may be hard or challenging, which will reflect challenges in the marriage. Then you want to look at the sun and the moon, male and female, and the signs that those two planets are in. You want to look at the planets Mars and Venus, male and female. Again, Mars rules lust. Venus rules love. Mars is the sex drive. Venus is the emotional drive for partnership and harmony. So you look to Mars and Venus, as well as the sun and the moon, and the signs those planets are in, and the aspects made by and to those planets. So you begin to get an idea of how complex this topic is. And then she asks about the ages of marriage. It's interesting in astrology, the harmonics established by the planetary degrees at birth, and I'll show you what I mean, give you an idea of ages of things. So you may have a planet, let's say Jupiter in the seventh house at 10 degrees. Well, marriage at 10 years old is probably not going to happen unless you're from maybe a Middle Eastern culture where arranged marriages happen. But you can take that Jupiter in the seventh house at 10 degrees and multiply it by 2, and you get age 20. And by George, around age 20, that's when that person will probably have her or his first really serious relationship, which may be and probably is sexual, but it's true love. They may get married around age 20. That's pretty young, but people do. They may marry because of pregnancy, which is, let's say, Jupiter in a fertile sign in that seventh house. Jupiter's at 10 degrees. You can multiply it by 2 and get age 20. You can multiply it by 3 and age 30. Every 10 years, that Jupiter in the seventh house archetype is activated and prominent and predominant in the life. Every 10 years. Now, if Jupiter's in a fixed sign, that will tend to indicate the marriage will last a long time. It may not be the only marriage, but it will last a long time. If Jupiter is in a cardinal or a mutable sign in the seventh house, less lasting. Unless, of course, there are some stabilizing aspects to that Jupiter, trines and sextiles and so on. So every 10 years, a person with Jupiter in the seventh house, and I have had a client, she has been married 5 times. Once she lost her husband to divorce. 3 times she lost the husband to death. And she is in her 80s now and married yet again. She likes to be married. So I hope this is helping establish in your mind all of the factors that you need to consider. If you have Jupiter in a degree between, let's say, 10 and 20 degrees of a sign, that's the middle decade of the sign. So the middle years for a favorable marriage. Jupiter in later degrees, the last third of a sign, for example, can indicate marriage later in life. So you can use those decanates to begin to get a symbolic picture of the time in life for a marriage. But you must consider the aspects to it. For example, at Jupiter in the seventh house may be square Uranus, which is, among other things, the planet of divorce and separation. But these things have to be in the birth chart, and you really do have to study them and probably notate them and consider the signs that each one of these things are in, these archetypes, and each archetype's aspects to and from other planets, especially the aspects between the ruler of the first house and the ruler of the seventh house. The first house is you, or the client, and the seventh house is the partner. So favorable aspect between the rulers of the first and the seventh will tend to indicate a more favorable marriage. Hard aspects between those two, less favorable. Doesn't mean they won't get married, but the marriage is likely to be a lot less harmonious and more prone to dissolve for whatever factor. And today, marriage is not just legal. It can be, but living together constitutes a seventh house relationship. Most people don't, most astrologers are not even aware of this. Fifth house relationships are romantic relationships. They're speculative. As long as you are dating, either partner can walk out of the relationship with no penalty. It's been fun. I don't think this is going anywhere. Love you. Nice to know you. Moving on. The minute you move in together, whether it's a legal marriage or not, now it's a relationship between equals. Are you splitting the rent? Who takes out the garbage? Who leaves the toilet seat up or down? Now suddenly it's a first-seventh relationship, even though it may not be legal. So those are all things to consider. I don't know, Thomas, is this getting a little too abstruse here?
Well, as usual, it's a brilliant answer. But I took a couple of notes, and I'd like to run a few things by you here. Okay, you mentioned fertile and infertile signs, and we've done that in the podcast, but particularly we put that whole thing into a PDF, and it's in the rectification product that we have for sale, which right now, as we're recording this, is right up at the top of the funastrology.com website. So if you'd like that list, it was a bonus. We threw a couple of things in there additional, and that was one of them. So that fertility list, what signs and planets are fertile and not fertile, is all there in that rectification product. But I would like to ask you, if we could here, because it is directly, I think, to what she was asking, which signs are more favorable and less favorable for a successful marriage?
Well, again, in different ways. Let's start with Aries, for example. It's one of the most romantic, with a capital R, signs in the zodiac, very idealistic, generally yearns to be married. Aries is also a sign of the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. So Aries is always looking ahead. One of the key phrases associated with Venus in Aries or Mars in Aries or the Sun in Aries is they marry in haste and repent at leisure. So Aries has an unconscious orientation toward always looking beyond the present, and that includes beyond the present partner. So in the backs of their minds, if any little thing is wrong with the marriage internally, they're looking for options. And they will often convince themselves the grass is greener over there than it is over here. Aries is not the most practical sign in the zodiac and the most realistic either. It's hugely idealistic. So, but because of that, it's neither favorable nor unfavorable for marriage. But in fact, Aries people do tend to marry more than once. Now, these are all tendencies and predispositions, not flat statements. Taurus is a great sign for marriage because Taurus, whether it's the Sun, Moon, or Venus, or Mars even, Taurus tends to want, it's the sign ruled by Venus, so it's the sign of love. It wants to find a mate and stay with that mate forever. So it can be incredibly loyal. And it wants that kind of emotional and material security. It's the sign of the builder. So unlike Aries, Taurus relationships tend to become more and more stable and more steady with time. Because familiarity and comfort is associated with Taurus. Gemini, what do you think? It's a sign of versatility and change and multiple interests. It's a double sign. So if it appears on the seventh house, Gemini can be a sign of more than one marriage. The Sun, the Moon, Venus, or Mars in Gemini can be a sign of more than one marriage. You get to Cancer, the sign of security and stability in the home and the family. And like Taurus, Cancer is searching for that sort of familiarity and roots, that sense of family and stability and permanence, but it is a cardinal sign. It's a restless sign, a changeable sign. It can make for a wonderful dynamic marriage, but there's often a lot of change in the marriage. For example, the minute you get pregnant and have children, that changes the marriage. And children then become a fifth house focus, so you need to look at the fifth house for these kinds of charts. But Cancer is another sign that predisposes to marriage or marriage-like relationships. Leo, the same thing. The fire signs in general are very idealistic, and Leo is certainly a romantic sign, even more so probably than Aries is, and it's also a fixed sign. And it's known for loyalty. So Leo, configured with the marriage significators, again, can indicate a marriage and a lasting marriage. If there are hard aspects to the marriage significators in Leo, they can indicate either divorce or separation through death. But often a Leo person will have one marriage. They're very much like Sagittarius in this way. Sagittarius, by the way, they're two signs. Sagittarius and Virgo are both known in astrology as the bachelor and bachelorette signs. Interesting. Sagittarian people, I'm talking fire signs now in connection with Leo, very often will tend to marry fairly young. And if they have children, they're going to have them young. And then they get often divorced. And many of them never marry again. But like Gemini, Sagittarius is a double sign. It's half human, half animal, the centaur. So it's a double sign. So it can predispose again to more than one marriage or marriage-like relationship. So we've got Leo. Virgo is the born healer, the born fixer-upper. And as a result, Virgos go through life looking at what needs fixing. And they're great at it. But because their focus is on what's wrong, what's off, what needs fixing, it's a very independent sign, Virgo. And it is not the world's most favorable sign for a marriage. It's great for a business partnership and a marriage where the couple works together or they both have equally compelling careers and work lives. But it is a perfectionist sign, and it's a critical sign by nature. That's one of the assets of Virgo, is being critical in a constructive way. If it's critical in a destructive way, then it can absolutely undermine not only marriage, but all relationships. So, and these signs, for example, Virgo is a semi-barren sign. The earth signs and water signs are generally considered fertile. But within those, you've got semi-fertile and semi-barren and so on. You can look all these things up online or in the books. So Leo, Virgo, Libra is the natural sign of marriage, but it is also a cardinal sign. And like all cardinal signs, there's a certain amount of restlessness involved in this, and a certain amount, just like in Aries, if the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, Libra is very much a sign that lives in its head. It's romantic, just like Aries is, but its ideal of marriage can often be too idealistic and too unrealistic. So Libra, oddly enough, even though it rules marriage, is also prone to more than one marriage. Scorpio, again, very much like Taurus, Scorpio people are loyal beyond belief. There's an old saying about Scorpio men. They will tell you they love you once, and you'll never hear it again. They do love you, but they don't see any need to tell you all the time. But Scorpio is a deeply, deeply loyal and committed sign. It is also the sign of sex. And in some people, depending on the positions of Mars, which rules Scorpio, and Pluto, they may have compulsive sex drives that can upset a marriage or lead them to having affairs and so on, but their loyalty to the mate is steadfast. They mean it when they say, I do, and they want it to last until death do us part. But a marriage with Scorpio can go through some dramatic ups and downs, more intense probably than most any other sign. But nonetheless, it's a very powerful, potent sign, and marriage changes both partners on very deep levels, which is one of the reasons why Scorpio unions last a long time. And they are often ended primarily through death. So you'll see Scorpio people that get married, and whether the marriage is easy or difficult, they stay married. One of the other partners may get sick, become ill, they may die. Then the Scorpio may or may not go on to a second marriage. Again, it depends on the positions of Mars and Pluto a lot. Sagittarius, again, it's an independent sign. It's a very loving sign, very loyal, but like all mutable signs, it's changeable and restless and explorative. Scorpio's nature is to live ahead of itself, to live in the future, to explore everything, both geographically through travel, as well as intellectually through studying a higher thought and higher concepts. It's always moving forward. So, and it's a terrific sign for marriage as long as the partner is equally interested in moving forward and exploring things. But it's an independent sign as well, Sagittarius is. So the minute that marriage becomes too clingy, for example, they're out of there. It's a wonderful sign, though. Capricorn is another one. It wants to be married because it's supposed to be married. It's very status conscious and aware of society is built on marriages. Everybody's married. There's something wrong with you if you're not married. So I want to be married. Not only do I want to be married, I'd like to be well married to somebody who's accomplished, successful, in a position of power and achievement and so on. So they're also a sign that can form a very lasting marriage, especially, again, much like Virgo, if the couple work together and they have the same outlook on life. For example, Capricorn should marry another professional or another ambitious achiever. So Capricorn marriages tend to last. Capricorn can also be something of a loner, especially the older it gets. But it's another one like Leo in a sense that means it when it says, I do. Aquarius, gregarious Aquarius. What can I say? They're wonderful people. Marriage, as long as you marry with an open hand, love with an open hand. And this is a big lesson for all of us to learn. Aquarius is great at this. Aquarians love everybody. When they're married, their mates may think that they're flirting. They're not. They don't want to go to bed with just everybody they meet, but they are warm and friendly and open and affectionate with everybody. And that can be mistaken for flirting, which it isn't. What Aquarians are, though, very much like Sag, is they're an independent sign. And they, too, valued their freedom and their independence. So they like a partner who is not jealous, not possessive, not clinging, and who hopefully the partner also has their interests that keep the partners separated to some degree, but for positive reasons. They're either involved with their own works or their own hobbies and so on, their own friends. And this is all based on trust. So Aquarians will often have unusual, even unconventional partnerships, open marriages, for example, or arrangements in marriage, which distinguish them. Pisces, come on. The lovers of the zodiac, the most sensitive of all people. Marriage is difficult for Pisces, not because of them, so much as their compassion for underdogs, really, and for other people is so strong that their emotional commitment can vacillate depending on the weather or depending on the mood and so on, and depending on their partner's needs. So Pisces people can often become involved unconsciously in codependent relationships, which is something that they may need to look out for. And because secrecy is also associated with Pisces, then the areas of fidelity and loyalty can become issues in Pisces marriages, so that trust is often tested in Piscean relationships. And there can be self-doubts or doubts about the other person. If they're not true, those doubts can undermine the marriage. Why don't you believe me? Why would you think I'm playing around? And sometimes those doubts are true and the person may be playing around. So I don't know if this gives you a kind of idea of how to begin, Thomas, to look at these signs, but hopefully it's a start.
No, I think we need to start over. I love to get him like that.
Oh, I'm happy to. Anytime.
No, that was
Take
great. And I think it certainly the combinations of things that we talked about in there can answer our listeners' questions. So thank you for that great walkthrough. And it makes me realize one thing, that when you take any topic in astrology, you really could extrude it as well to all of this. And it is the danger of something that I think you probably hear, and I do too, when somebody texts you or rings you up, or a friend that you encounter out one night for dinner or something says, "Oh, hey, by the way, can you take a quick look at my chart?" Well, you just saw, yeah, sure thing, right? There is no such thing as a quick look at the chart. And in fact, a quick look at the chart could do more harm than good. So just keep that in mind if you have an astrologer in your life. Give them a break a little bit and realize that that's what readings are for, when you can dig into the nuts and bolts and nitty gritty of these issues. And you just saw how you can't take one thing and just throw it to the wall and make that stick. That doesn't work in this game. And this guy is doing readings. His website link is in the show notes, and we will see you guys back on the next episode. Thank you so much for watching. And Robert, thank you for a great answer.
Thank you.